Hi, thanks for joining us. I am Gavin Amara, CEO of FE News.
And I'm Phil Smith. I'm the chair of Skills England.
Hey Phil, thanks so much for joining me today. We're having a virtual coffee together, like wrap up of the year, and just wanted to sort of maybe chat through. It's been quite a year for Skills England and for yourself. So, how's it been for your first 6 months as chair, and anything in particular you'd like to sort of highlight you're particularly proud of?
Well, thanks, Gavin, first of all, for the chat. I mean, it's great to talk to you, and I know we had a chat at one of the conferences earlier on, which was really good to do. And even in that chat, we ended up all towards every subject you can imagine, I think, we've covered in the short time we had. But no, I mean, the first 6 months or so have been amazing, to be quite honest. I mean, you know, to be in many ways, there's nothing more important than the skills system. You know, we need to have a skilled and confident nation that's able to give people, you know, good jobs, good career prospects, and generate, you know, value for the country, both in growth terms for business, but also in, you know, opportunity terms for people as well, to get into meaningful work and things that, you know, give them a genuinely good life. So it's a super important area. And so being involved in it in the first 6 months has been pretty rock and roll, I think, is probably fair to say. It's been a lot of stuff. And, you know, there's just an awful lot of components in this. And, you know, therein lies the opportunity, Gavin. I mean, you know, we've got a system that's got huge numbers of components and capabilities and results, you know, some fantastic things going on. But as you know, we undoubtedly talk about more, that, you know, that makes it hard for some people to get at it. It makes other people feel that maybe it's, you know, some things that are not aligned up in there. And I think one of the great things over the last 6 months or so is, one, you know, probably burying myself into it with more time than I thought I would be spending. But the reality is that's like, you start to hear things, you start to understand what the conversations are. And I've always thought this, that, you know, as a leader, when you take over, whether it's a commercial company or in this case, you know, a government agency, is that you need to listen, because generally people kind of know what the answers are. You know, they know what should be done, but often they're stuck and they can't get things to happen. And the role often of a leader is to kind of either show the path or enable things to happen or to join things up. And I think the things that have really happened in the last 6 months have been great, because it's things like, you know, starting to get under the skin of, you know, the changes to the apprenticeship levy to become the growth and skills levy, things like lifelong learning entitlement, the apprenticeship standards themselves. And then, you know, frankly, just really good people. I mean, you know, the government gets a lot of criticism at times, you know, about, oh, you know, you don't understand business, or you don't understand this. We've got amazing people who are doing their absolute best to create a system that's, you know, that's effective. But it's not easy. There's a lot of change going on in the world at the moment, I'm sure we're going to go on to talk about. So I think the exciting thing has been getting to know the people, getting to understand the system, meeting loads of people, as you know, from FE colleges to universities to groups like, you know, the CBI and the FSB and all these sorts of people, individual companies, mayors, etc. Great. And just sort of synthesizing that and reading it back to the team and saying, this is what I'm hearing, is this what you understand? That's very exciting, and that hopefully gives us some really good opportunities.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you've also, you know, you've changed government departments as well. It's gone from DFE to DWP, and there's just been like this rapid amount of change. So I think it's exciting time, isn't it? And I think that's interesting, of going into DWP for some of the stuff we're going to talk about with, yeah, employability, with like NEETs and young people and economically inactive. I think really interesting sort of like switch there. One thing I'm interested in is you know, when we talked, it was back in the summer of all that time ago, a little bit different. It was boiling, if I remember rightly. Now I'm in a jumper now, kind of feeling freezing. But around, it was straight after the industrial strategy, actually. But the priority skills needs areas, I think, are particularly interesting, because I know you've broke those down into different areas, and that's drilling down again. So I'm interested to see, how is Skills England now supporting delivery on priority skills needs, basically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good, interesting point, Gavin, because as you probably know, I sit on the Industrial Strategy Advisory Council as a result of my role in Skills England. And I also sit on the Labour Market Evidence Group, which is a group engaging with, the Migration Advisory Council, the devolved authorities, as well as Skills England and the Industrial Strategy Council and DWP. And so it's the idea. So the nice thing about it is that you're kind of seeing the whole story, because when you're looking at skills generally, one of the challenges you have is, of course, that, there are lots of things you could do in skills. You could put money here, you create new things there, you do it. But unless you've got some kind of strategy, same with a company. Imagine a company that's building products. Well, it has the assumption that it's building a product in a particular area or a particular market need or whatever it might be. And the beauty of the industrial strategy is it's saying, okay, the government is betting on 8 primary sectors that it believes that growth is possible. So we not only, because there are other sectors which are growing, and these sectors will grow in their own, but if you focus them industrial strategy, then they have requirements. So they have requirements for maybe regulatory changes or infrastructure changes, but obviously they have skills requirements as well. So, you can't expect a division of a company to grow if you don't put some investment into it. And so the idea is these industrial strategy sectors are, priority sectors. And we've added 2 on, as you know, as Skills England. So we have health and social care and construction stroke building, to make sure, because they're part of the government's growth missions as well. So we're saying in those 10 sectors, 8+2, we genuinely believe that we can and should align the skills system to fulfill the requirements of those. Now, that doesn't mean that other sectors don't need skills. Of course they do. But in those priority sectors, there are definitely areas where they are now articulating through a series of plans that are being created, because in the industrial strategy, there was a sort of sector plan for each of, or around the time in the industrial strategy, there's a sector plan, which said, if you're in life sciences, then here's the plan for life sciences, clean energy, here's the plan for the clean energy, defense, etc. And then what happens with that is that you then get, again, we're lucky that I can see all these different parts, is the Skills England then dock in and go, okay, so what do you really need in those? And at the moment, there are a series of so-called job plans being created to say, okay, what does this sector really need now, in the medium term, and in the future? And how do you map on the things that we've got today, whether that be apprenticeships or anything for that matter, and boot camps, anything? How do they map onto this? And then what do we need to do, going forward? And, a number of things have been talked about, and we'll talk more about them as we go on. So in those priority sectors, what we're really saying is, okay, we definitely need to fulfill those, because you're not going to get the growth you need if you don't do that. Hopefully that will have benefit for all sectors, because if you get things simpler, or you make them more accessible, or you make the apprenticeship maybe more dynamic or more appropriate for today's world, that's probably good for other people as well. So I don't know whether that really answers your question, Gavin, but it's that sort of sense of seeing the whole story, if you will, which is quite powerful when you sit, in the Industrial Strategy Council, obviously in Skills England, and then in the Labour Market Evidence Group, which is the bit that's saying, how do we build our own local skills? I mean, obviously we do need some immigration as well for particular skill types, but how do we take our dependency away from that and make it more about growing our own skills and our own people? So yeah, it's kind of an interesting balance.
Yeah, no, definitely. Can I ask one thing around like priority skills needs? Because we're going to it in a bit with like you alluded to with NEETs and economic inactive, and there's a lot of things sort of happening with that. But I want to sort of have a bit more of a focused chat on that. But one thing I've noticed with priority skills needs is this challenge around, and it's brilliant that we're looking at labour market information and data, because I love a bit of data and labour market information, and I think that can drill down into local to national kind of. But like some of those areas, I could see there could be a challenge around, like say, construction. Had like a really massive, 1.5 million homes is a massive need for skills in construction, but also like clean energy. There's an even bigger need, even, like I think 60,000 for construction. Depends who you speak to. It's 125,000. Then I was at energy utility skills event, and it was like 400,000 for like the whole sort of utility sector. How that is a challenge to be able to balance that, because there's similar sort of skills needs. I can see a potential there around those taking people on a path and be able to take people on different routes. But how are you sort of tackling that challenge with looking at data, but also looking at local, national, and those priority sort of needs?
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of multi-dimensional, isn't it? Because, you just in the last sentence there said, the local, national, whatever. I mean, that's a huge dimension in itself, isn't it? That there are dimensions where, the Manchesters of the world, obviously, but also West Midlands and all the other mayoral authorities, let alone the other regions, are saying, we've got a real demand for stuff in our area, which is appropriate to us. Now, we recognise these priority sectors are a dimension as well, and we need to invest them. But I think the point you're getting at just before, I'm sure we'll go back into some of that sort of local, national, etc. But the bit about, priority sectors and the fact that there are overlaps. I mean, the classic one that's used a lot, I guess there's two of them. One is welding. People talk about welding. Yeah. I mean, I've got to say, welding's got to be the best thing in the world to get into now, because everybody's talking about you king of the world. You'll be, I'm a welder on my back or whatever, will be a very cool thing to have. But it definitely seems, but you're right. I mean, welding's massively important in construction. It's massively important in defense. It's massively important in clean energy. It's massively important in lots of other sectors as well, because it's a kind of core skill that probably has other attributes put on top of it. And the other one, of course, is digital, which is that we all know that if we can get people digitally confident, it's good for everybody. There isn't a sector you don't talk to now who says, yeah, we're transport or we're, clean energy or we're whatever, but we need a lot more digital people to understand the data, to, understand how to exploit AI, to know what the opportunities are in digital. Yep. So there are a number of things which are both a kind of, they're overlapping, but they have a sort of vertical and a horizontal nature to them as well, and some of the construction skills are clearly in that area. And I think that there's a set of things we can do in there. One is we can start to give people a bit of a sense as to how you navigate things. So if you're in construction, there may be some things you do which, maybe digital, for example, you might not feel like construction, but it's kind of important to what you're actually doing. But I think there's also an overall, I've talked to you before about simplification, which is one of the key kind of characteristics that I believe we need to address, and I think are starting to address in Skills England through communication and other things, is that we need to simplify the system. Because, things like apprenticeships, I mean, there are a lot of apprenticeship standards which were created over the years for very good reasons and have, created in many cases some really good apprenticeships. But the question is whether they're really exactly what they were when they started, or even that the world is exactly what it was when they started.
Things are changing fast, aren't they? That's the thing.
Things are changing fast, dynamics underneath us where you say, well, actually, is there a sort of set of common things that could be there? And then maybe slimmer sector-specific things, welding would be another example. You could learn how to basically weld. I know there's a lot of different types of welding, but then there's something about the specifics if you're doing that in a nuclear submarine, or if you're doing it in a, if you're doing it in a building site or whatever. Hopefully that's slightly different, but that kind of principle, there are sector-specific things. But that's sort of always been the case, Gavin. You'll know that probably when you started in your career looking at in the sort of journalism, and there was bits you knew about, and then there was things you learned while you were doing it because you were particular either, sector specific area, or if you're in other sectors, other things. And that was the same for me, when I was working, started to work, a lot of the stuff was about what that company did and the way they did it and so on. So I do think there's a level of simplification, which is good, because if we can simplify the kind of apprenticeship, just as an example, there's more than that, but if you can simplify that structure, then it's not like looking at a menu that's got 800 choices on it. It's a menu that's got 30 choices on it, and then you can add a bit of have some fries with that, and I'll have whatever. I don't know whether that's how it'll try.
Yeah, I totally get what you're doing.
Thinking it that way is like, what are the common things? Let's not duplicate. We've got little enough money and resource without duplicating things. So let's do the simple things and then add the extra things on that make it specific to that particular area. So lots of thinking about that, lots of working on to try and understand that at the moment. And then, with the funding changing and all that sort of stuff, that could be really powerful to help with that, I think.
And is that what you're sort of thinking with the units, like apprenticeship units, around having those different specialisms to be able to help people like stack into, as things develop and change, to be able to then sort of have an overall, like, this is a baseline skill that is really interesting for lots of different things, but units could then draw people
Yeah,
into
you
stuff.
could definitely see that as an evolution of that, because those units, and we know we've talked about things like digital and whatnot as being early parts of that. They would be really handy to have that. I mean, I always use the example, you can imagine a plumber. We've obviously got a challenge in persuading smaller businesses to take on apprenticeships on the whole. I mean, there are some who do it brilliantly, but if you're a plumber and you're going to take on an apprentice, and this young person turns up on the first day, and you can't really expect them to do a bunch of soldering and bending and all that. They might have learned some of that, but they wouldn't necessarily have learned everything. But it would be really interesting if that young person joined your organization and said, oh, I know a bit about doing website, and I actually know a little bit about e-invoicing and whatnot as well. And suddenly the plumber, who might be a bit long in the tooth, goes, actually, that'd be really good if you could help with that part of it too. So there's a set of common things that people will need to engage in the life, the work and life, that if people who are coming into it can bring those alongside their specialization, would be great. So to your point, there probably are bolt-on things that would actually help with it, and it would mean that you don't have to do a full course, whether it be apprenticeship or anything else, in that it's just a bolt-on. I remember on pretty much one of the first meetings I was in Skills England, I think it was David Hughes from the colleges, from one of the colleges association, who was talking about the fact that they were after some people who were doing hybrid controllers for heat pumps and boilers or whatever. And I think he had gone down the path and people going, yeah, we need to create an apprenticeship and that. It's like, no. People just want a short course that allows them to be up to speed on that, because that's not going to be there forever. And you don't want to become a specialist in just that one thing, but you do need to know about it. So you want a kind of course that bolts onto what you've got, and then says, okay, over time, maybe that disappears or becomes part of the core or whatever it might be. So that sort of thinking, I think, is definitely where we'd like to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. We're sort of alluding into it really, but we've had a lot of white papers, and stuff like they come at like a flurry as well at one point. So, can we talk about the post 16, skills for jobs white paper?
Yeah.
From the Skills England perspective, what out there is real sort of key areas of interest for you, and what are sort of things that you think that providers, like colleges, training providers, awarding organisations, and employers should be thinking of?
Yeah, well, I think, we were pleased, obviously, within the white paper that it, reinforced the position of Skills England as the kind of authoritative voice and the position in the ecosystem, which is really important. And also that, we would have the responsibility, for engaging with business and really starting to understand how we build things that are appropriate to the system that we need. And I think that's really powerful. And obviously when you saw it's been reinforced again today that the Prime Minister, in the last, it was been reinforced in a number of statements. I think we've had Pat McFadden over the last week or so talking about various things for young people. We've had the Prime Minister reiterating things, and I think it was back at the Labour Party conference, he talked about this idea of having 2/3 of the young people who are in higher education or training, so not just 50-50 at university. So I think all of that sort of stuff started to be signalled in the white paper, and it was trying to say how do we build a system which is appropriate for people who need to be into that has to be in vocations or training or jobs that are appropriate and get the right kind of skills. How do you get people with things like, you'll have heard obviously in one of the flurries of papers, things like V levels and whatnot. So how do we have vocational level qualifications and so on? So it started to sort of paint the landscape of all the different components that needed to be there, and also were appropriate for the next generation. And I think that's really important for us to do that, because we know that, as we just discussed, the system has been built and has been put together for lots of initiatives over the years, and it can feel a bit bitty and fragmented. And I think the white paper was an attempt, to try and bring a lot of that together and start to talk about it as a unified system. And obviously, things like the collaboration between colleges and universities and all those things that were talked about as well in there is really powerful, because it's sort of what people want, and actually what a lot of good people are already doing. I went up to Harper Adams University a few weeks ago to talk to them, and they were collaborating with Telford College, and there was lots of really good things going on that were all sort of signaled in the white paper. And I think we need to find more ways of doing that, because to the previous point about simplification, people kind of want to just say, okay, I want a better job, or I want a job, or I want to improve my opportunities in life. I've got a young family. What do I need to do? And to sort of throw everything in the skill system at them and go, there you go, sort it out. That's hard, so we need to tie it together and show us. I think the white paper went some way to starting to do that. And we in Skills England, as part of our white paper, were given the remit, said, you really need to be the authoritative voice on this. You need to engage people and businesses better. And I think that's really where, it's good news that we've got that out there.
Yeah, no, definitely. You can see the reason why, from an employer perspective, about simplification. You mentioned SMEs as well, and there's been like recent announcements around, reducing like cost for SMEs to be able to engage particularly young people. And I think it's also, it seems to be that realization that this is that additional stuff, like you said, for that plumber who is struggling with probably doing their invoicing potentially, and like how can an additional member of staff have that? It's interdisciplinary skills, really, isn't it? Like how can they help them with additional stuff? How can we simplify that down for them, really? And I think it's a big step to getting there, really, isn't it, for them to be able to understand, this is how I can engage, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely. And you can see that. I mean, I chaired the task force earlier on in the summer on technology adoption by small business. And it wasn't, anything magical in there, because we know that small businesses struggled for a long time to engage with technology, and particularly, the productivity challenges we have in the UK. The two big levers that are seen as needle movers on productivity are kind of management and leadership and technology adoption. And of course, those are interwoven. A good leadership, often you find a good technology adopters. People who talk technology often have good leaders. But the reality was a bunch of things in there about, simplifying again, about can the government make it look more straightforward? Can you give easy access to people? Can you look at some of the behavioral activities that people do? Because, if you're a small business, and this is over-characterizing because there's masses of different small business, but if you're a small business who's time poor and even attention poor because they've got a million things to do, the idea that you somehow then go and spend a lot of time working out how apprenticeships work and go and finding the right funding models and what's the right college and what course, you can see how immediately people's heads would try to start to drop, and they go, oh my God, I don't want to do this. So we will suggest, that particularly with AI, which I know we'll talk a bit about later, but, it's not beyond the way. I mean, anybody who's used one of the modern large language models, chatbots, I mean, it's incredible what you can say to them. You can say, can you help me, put this together with all this kind of information? I mean, why don't we use that technology to help us? We'd like to have an individual person supporting every small business in Britain, but there are 5.5 million small business, 5.7 small businesses in the UK. We're not going to have 5.7 million people, looking at those small businesses. Yep. You obviously will have to have people in the loop, and it's very important that we do. But why wouldn't you use some of the modern technology to make that easier? So instead of just giving people a list of things or a website to look at, you say, look, I'm a small business, I'm in the retail industry, have a look at my website, you can see what I do, you can see where I am. What would you recommend as the next steps if I'm wanting to bring on some talented young staff who are, who can help me with my business? That's not an impossible thought. If you ask that to a chatbot today, they would just do it for you. Yeah. But, if you could customize that more with a real system around it, that'd be incredible. So we talked about that in the Small Business Adoption Task Force. And then, in Skills England, I think we need to look at, how can we genuinely get the system to scale better? Because scale is everything, Gavin. I mean, there's, you'll know better than me because you're, talking to people all the time. There are amazing things happening all over the country. but they're really not well connected and they don't add up to the sum of the parts. There's lots of duplication of people. And some of that's natural. You're always going to have that. You know, if you've got a charity that's very focused on one thing, you can't say, oh, why don't you become part of this big charity? Because they're like really focused on that one thing because they had challenges in their family or whatever. It's the same with this. You know, you've got lots of really great skills initiatives, all a bit fragmented and so on. Somehow or another, even if you can't make it all simpler, you can hide the wiring a bit and just make it easier for people to engage with it. So
no, that actually leads to my next question I was going to ask, actually, around supporting local but national needs. It's sort of like, how can you sort of join this together? And I don't know, I'd be interested in some of your thoughts on that, particularly with like local skills improvement plans, but that whole local and national, I think you was alluding to it there, like there's some really cool things happening here, but how can we
no, it's a really interesting area. Sorry, Gavin, it's a really interesting area because, you know, we all know that local has massive power, and frankly, it's kind of easier to kind of digest it at the local level. It's still hard in many cases because we had our board meeting up at in the West Midlands Combined Authority offices a couple of weeks ago, which was great. It was a board strategy day. And we had, you know, some folks from the authority come and tell us about their world. And even if you took it with their lens, there's a ton of stuff going on, you know, from all the local colleges and universities and catapult centres and all that sort of stuff they've all got on. So they've got enough to digest in there, if you're let alone looking at it at the national level where you've got that times X, you know, or times 10, 20, whatever it might be. So, so yes, it's definitely easy. And also the reality is, as human beings, you would naturally look, if you're a young person, you would probably naturally look to your local college or maybe what your local school would advise, or, you know, even what's advertised on the bus that's driving around, or, you know, you would kind of look to that. And as a small business, often they're very good at looking to local communities, whether it be the chamber or just some local networking group, or even just friends who are running businesses as well. So local is super important. And it's super important from both an understanding perspective and also from a delivery perspective. So, you know, a lot of these things will be delivered locally by local colleges or local universities or local training providers or whatever. It doesn't mean they're not national organizations, but they're local. So the point of all that is local is super important. And obviously with, you know, a big percentage of the adult skills budget devolved to, you know, authorities, and also with the increasing visibility and power of the mayors and so on to do things, that's great. Because also the other factor, of course, is that local is the ability to bring other things in, like transport, because we hear so often, you know, the challenge with many people in getting whether it's to work or certainly to skills, is that they haven't got the transport to get to the college or whatever it might be. And although you can do a lot virtually these days, you don't want to isolate people too much in that environment. So, you know, they have some other levers they can pull at the local level, which might help join things up that we probably couldn't do nationally. But the counterpoint of all that, Gavin, is, as we were talking about before, which is, you know, I think there's a lot of things in the past have failed because government have said, right, it's all about local, so we'll either give money or not. In some cases, didn't even give money, but, you know, it's all about local. Go and fill your boots and do your local thing. And of course, people initially go, great, you know, you've given the responsibility to us locally. And then what happens, of course, they build it up and it's fine. And some are really good and some are not so good. And then it gets all a bit fragmented. And particularly if you're an employer, you go, well, I'm in Leicestershire and I want to hire somebody in Northamptonshire, but there's completely different qualifications there and I can't get the same people. And, you know, all that sort of stuff starts to happen. So it's always attracted me is the sort of, I don't know, what you might describe as a franchise model. And I know this is, again, you know, sort of oversimplifying it, but the principle that you could have some set of stuff that works, whether that's because you've copied it from another local environment and said, hey, Manchester did a great job on this, why don't you look at doing something similar to this? Not just from a funding perspective, but, you know, they needed these kind of peoples and they needed, you know, 2 colleges and they needed a university and all that. You know, you needed these bits to make it successful. But somewhere or another, it's got this sort of principle where you're doing what's right for your local environment, but maybe with some help, support, guidelines, connections to the national frameworks. Now, obviously, things like apprenticeships are an obvious example of that, you know, where you're actually creating apprenticeship standards and people then apply them locally or whatever. But the local skills improvement plans are a great example, Gavin, as you said. I mean, those were, the idea of those were, there were plans created in the local environment, enabled by folks like the Chambers, who brought local businesses and colleges and whatnot together and tried to say, here's what's good about us and what we need. And I think, you know, as ever with these things, and the good news is that we're going into a kind of second phase of those now, and Skills England has responsibility for those, is that you learn from the first time. I mean, you know, the natural tendency, if you're a local environment, is to big up everything about you. You're like, we're the best at this or that. And that's fine. But, you know, if it doesn't really represent the local skills environment and it doesn't include everybody in the local environment, then, you know, that's not great, because you're not really showing a picture. What you're doing is painting a sort of facade that says, we're amazing at this and you should invest in us here. And actually, they've not really got anything. So I think the second phase, the local skills improvement plans, I think Skills England have already issued some guidance about, you know, what can and should be in them. And certainly when I talk to people about it, I keep saying, you just get involved, you know, because often you find, whether it be in the local skills improvement or a sector or whatever, you know, you get a group together, and I think I've talked to you before at this, but, you know, we need sectors and local environments and others to organise themselves, because we can't do it for you. We Skills England, or we even the government can't do it. To a degree, it's up to people to kind of get that stuff together. And if you can get it together, then, you know, that allows us to sort of, if someone says to me, you know, I'm in such and such an area and I want to be involved in skills, and I say, well, you involved in the local skills improvement plan, they go, nah, that's somebody else. It's like, well, no, really, you really do need to get involved, because we are looking to those as a sort of definitive, alongside the authorities, you know, a definitive view of what is going on in the area. So the more we can kind of encourage people to lean in, same with the sectors, you know, if you've got construction doing whatever, and then you get a bunch of people who are going, yeah, but those construction guys over there, they're not the same as us. It's like, no, guys, you need to do something about that, because it doesn't help anybody if you're sort of infighting, so to speak, not really infighting, but disagreeing. You know, we need to get people helping, because, you know, it's a hard enough job as it is without, you know, lots and lots of different factions all giving you different pictures of what's happening locally or what's happening sectorally or what's happening nationally or whatever. So
any recommendation on that for people, like, because you've seen it across the country, you know, like different local skills improvement plans that are, like, obviously some are going to be more collaborative, more working like wider and sort of like come and join us. But how could a small niche training provider or an employer or an SME be able to lean more into local for skills, or be able to just sort of keep it more open? Any recommendation on how to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, I hesitate to sort of just point people at things, but I think on the whole, there are some others, and I think if you do look online, you can see who all the kind of employer representative bodies, I think is the term they use, but basically the kind of enablers of the local skills improvement plans are, which is often the chamber of, you know, the local chamber of commerce. You know, I would reach out to them and say, you know, either I'd like to be involved in this, or I'd like to be kept up to date to it. I'd like to comment on documentation, whatever it might be. You know, I think we should be encouraging people as much as possible to be involved. And I think particularly the providers will probably take the time to do that. I think the challenge is probably the other way more, Gavin, which is that people like the chambers need to make sure that they are getting representatives from, you know, whatever sectors they believe are appropriate in their area, and not sort of talking on their behalf. So get, you know, real people talking. But the more we can do that, the better. Because, you know, there will always be some people who will want to be involved, and, you know, and that's great, and we should encourage those people. But sometimes it's getting to the people who find it all a bit harder, that you do need to get involved. I mean, there's something you know, I went through many years of everything, whether it be business or government or anything. But I'll give you it in the business context. You know, when I used to run Cisco, and when I was running Cisco, if we wanted to do something new, I don't know, for example, if you had your sales team and you wanted them to sell more with kind of financial acumen, you know, you wanted to talk about leases and all that sort of stuff, and they'd been traditionally selling products, then, you know, you would train them to do that. You'd get them some training. And what would happen was they'd be, the way that people would often do it is they'd go to the best sales guys and they'd go, right, we're going to teach you how to do financial selling. And these guys go, oh, this is amazing. You know, it's fantastic. I love it. And then they would go, great. And then the mistake people would make goes, okay, let's roll that out to the rest of the sales force. And then the other people in the sales force who are not the top 10% who would do it anyway go, oh, it's too hard. You know, I haven't got time to do this. I've got other numbers to meet and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty obvious that what you end up in most circumstances is a few who will always be the active ones who are dynamic, good management, all that sort of stuff. There's then probably a few at the bottom who will never do it because that's just way too hard and never ever, I'm stuck where I am. And there's probably 80% in the middle who actually would like to do it, but just haven't got the time or the initiative, or maybe the thing is too complex. And so I think the job of, you know, the chambers and other bodies who are bringing these plans together is to think about not the great companies who are doing amazing stuff. They should be involved, but how do you get some representation of the people who just find it a bit too hard and it's quite difficult to do? Because actually those are the people you're really trying to get involved, and cracking the problems for them are going to make it better for everybody. You know, if you make it easier for the hard to reach, so to speak, then you make it better for everybody. And I think there's definitely some of that needs to be done. And then the more people can identify those kind of companies or individuals or whoever that should be involved, what are the nudges? What are the behavioural things? What are the incentives that would make it better for them? It's really,
no, very, very cool. No, I love that. It's like we've got a report that's just come out on green mindset, and that's talking a lot about that 3% of the change makers that can affect the 85%. So it's really interesting.
Definitely. Behavior's a big thing. Behavioral economics, behavioral science. You know, how do you actually get people to do things? It's quite hard.
No, definitely. I'm really interested in, because you sit with multiple hats, really, and I want to go to like your background with Cisco a little bit in a sec, but things are changing. I see the way AI automation. I mean, ChatGPT was 3 years old the other day, like maybe 2 weeks ago, and like I think we've got like a rocket ship that's like about to take off, but it's still on the rumbling. It's still on the launch pad. It hasn't actually took off yet. It's still sort of, countdown that it's gone, but it hasn't rocketed yet. And like with labor market and data, it's that next stage, because AI also can help us with this as well, can't it? Around like, looking at like large language models, around looking at what we're doing with data. I just come back from Qatar and they were talking about the way that they're looking at data to try to predict and stuff like that. Is that going to be something that's potentially on the horizon for Skills England, or to think about for local skills, as automation could change things, or as things start to really rocket around things around priority skills areas, how they could potentially change? Is that sort of in the
I mean, AI clearly, it's a big disruptive force anyway. So it's in the mix, and I think particularly, we haven't talked a huge amount about it today, but the focus on getting young people into work, the NEETs issue is super important, and kind of people assume, oh, young people, digital and all that sort of stuff, and also even that this will be a great opportunity, and it potentially could be. But it's very dynamic, and obviously the reason the government have kind of tilted a lot towards young people is we do need to get that new talent into the workforce and feeling confident and capable and so on, and that's exactly what we should be doing. But the reality is that technology in this form is a step change. We've had lots of big technological changes over the years, but some of the big technological ones in the last sort of generation or two have been things like the internet, the mobile phone, and so on, even the PC to a degree, where there was sort of lots done on it in the early stages, but its ability to genuinely catapult the capabilities of companies or nations or whatever, took another step. And it's often said that we often overestimate technologies in the short term and underestimate them in the longer term. So, I mean, the classic is, the internet. I mean, I was running Cisco back in the day, and, we would be talking to people about the internet and how it's going to change everything. And of course, in some cases it did, at that time. in some cases, it's taken till now till that industry has actually changed.
Yep.
You know, so that didn't mean that its transformational capability wasn't enormous, and it is. I mean, who would be able to survive today without the ability to order online and check status and book this and do flights and do all that sort of stuff? You know, it's incredible. And, you know, AI has clearly got another step change. And part of the step change, I think, is that its accessibility. And I think, you know, the mobile phone is a good example of that. I can still remember, it must have only been about 6 months before the iPhone was announced, seeing an article in the press, the trade press, going, you will never browse the internet on a phone. It just doesn't work. Right? Because in those days, you had little Blackberries and you got a mini version of the website.
And stuff like that.
Something. It was just, it wasn't, that way was never going to work. But once you actually got the mobile phone and it was in your hand and all that data and all that processing power, you're like, oh my God, this is transformation. You know, I can do business differently. Look at restaurants now where they all take your order on the phone and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's just become the norm. The same was true. I remember when people buying department PCs, you know, they had the corporate system, which was on big green screens, IBM green screens, and people would buy a PC because they could run a spreadsheet on it and they could do a, you know, Word document or whatever on it. And they're like, this is incredible. You know, it's much better than the thing we've got in the corporate system. Then they suddenly went, oh, but the data can't connect to that corporate system. And my PC just crashed and I haven't backed it up. It's like, oh my God, you know. So suddenly people started to realize the challenge of scaling something from a kind of local productivity enhancer to a kind of company-wide, nationwide productivity enhancer. Now, you know, I think AI has got a massive potential for the two reasons you said. One is for that kind of model, you know, how do I genuinely manipulate data better, write documents, update things, so all the things it can do straight out of the box in human ways, you know, in English or whatever language you speak, you can just talk to this thing and it just does it, which is incredible. The other thing, however, is its ability then to act on behalf or to augment human power in the way that we were discussing earlier. You know, if you're trying to get a small business to do something, why just stick a website up with a few links on it? Why not curate that for them and use the way of doing it? In the slightly more sophisticated level, I mean, Skills England are already using large language models, and I want us to make a bit more noise about this, which is that we've got a thing called Skills Compass, which has been created and worked with a bunch of people where we're taking, you know, horizon scanning data from Innovate UK's work. We're taking job codes and we're taking job adverts and we're synthesizing them all together and looking at trends of things. It's got to be amazing for that kind of stuff, you know, because you know how good it is at sorting stuff out. It's astonishingly powerful. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for us to sort of not keep thinking we've got to do everything the way we did it before, which is if you can't have a person sitting in front of someone, I'm sorry, it doesn't work. Well, that's not the world we're in now. We've got a much different world of, you know, of data and of, you know, of you know, the AI models that can do things. And I think we need to open our minds a little bit. And, you know, the rapidity of change, to your point, you're on the launch pad, you're sitting this thing, you know, chained down at the boot, ready to go. It could do incredible things. And I think, you know, if we can get, you know, both government, and not to say the government aren't, but there's lots of places in government people are using this stuff already. But government and, you know, bodies like ours to start going, actually, we really do need to use this technology because, frankly, we're never going to get the funding or the resourcing or whatever to do it in the way one might have traditionally done it. We can do it completely differently. And we know, I mean, I think I was chatting to you earlier on about, you know, I rang the Apple help desk and the sound of somebody when you talk to the chatbot and there's a bit of typing going on in the background. That's not, I mean, it's a bit of a trick, but it sort of gives you a bit of a sense that this feels like a real person doing something for you. You know, and it's similar to the point we were making before about behavior. We need to make it comfortable for people. And it's not like that's a gigantic leap. This stuff is actually working today in lots of companies, saving them huge amounts of time and effort and simplifying things for people and making it quicker and all that. You know, I went on to that Apple thing, you know, I really do want to talk to someone, how do I get a person? And then before I knew it, it said, yeah, this is what you want to do. Your thing's been shipped. It'll be here tomorrow. Oh, great. Thank you very much. I'm happy.
And I think agentic AI is I think probably the most important report I've read all year is Microsoft's frontier firms around agentic AI and how that's sort of transforming like the world of work. And I agree. Like I normally would like I'd love to be able to speak to a human, but actually if there's an agent like an AI agent that could do it really quick, then why would you? And when I was in Qatar, there was nations, there was like large organizations there and small actually talk about AI being the great leveler around like this levels this up for everyone, and that's the main sort of area of,
Well, and to be fair, that terminology was used before. I remember talking back in
yeah,
Cisco, you know, the internet being the great level of the fact that you could go out into Africa or rural India and people could access, you know, information and jobs and so on that they could never have done before. And I think it's another level of that, which says actually there are things that would be impossible for certain people or nations or groups or whatever to do. You've now got a super smart capability alongside you. And I think the real trick in all this, Gavin, is for us to say, how do we as humans not get intimidated by that? And, you know, I'm involved with the 7.5 million AI commitment stuff that the government have said during London Tech Week. And I honestly think in the broader sense, we should be saying, how do we give every person in this nation, the confidence to both engage with AI in the way that you would do more sophisticated, or even at least just to understand the basics of it so you don't feel intimidated by it. Because if you give people that confidence, then they might try it a little bit. You might see them use it at work more, you know, and it's confidence is a lot of what this is about, you know. I'm not going to go, oh my God, I'm never going to touch that because it's so scary, you know. So
yeah, no, 100%. And it's a bit like, you know, these people, like you said with the mobile phone, when it was like
yeah.
really difficult to be able to look on a teeny screen, things have moved on and rapidly, haven't they? Around like you have to embrace AI really. Can we talk about NEETs and young people? Because this whole picture around local, national, AI first, we don't even mention that around how that's affecting things like internationally. But there's a lot of movement, a lot of focus for young people and trying to break that. That it's nearly 1 million, but to be fair, we just had the NEET figures maybe 3 weeks ago now, and it dropped slightly. It was only 2,000 drop, but it dropped. A drop is in the right direction, you know. It's
Exactly.
moving. So yeah, what are your sort of thoughts on what we need to be doing around NEETs and those that are not NEET yet? You know, like there's a lot of
Yeah.
recent announcements around trying to at-risk young people as well. But some of the things which are happening with engaging young people and trying to reduce that NEET number more.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not a simple issue. You know, it's a bit like SME. You know, you talk about SMEs, and I talk about SMEs, and of course, there are a million different types of SMEs and so on. And it's true of young people as well. But you know, all young people are young, which is something we can definitely say. And you know, we want, as a nation, we should want our young people to go into useful, productive, fulfilling jobs that give them and their families and their future families a good standard of living and so on. And we know that, you know, we are supposedly, this generation will be the first generation will be less well off than their parents. So that's tough for young people coming into that world. And I think we owe it to them to find ways of cracking what some of the issues are. And, you know, there are a lot of complex issues. I mean, these kids that grew up in school or university during COVID, I mean, we've done a lot. We can see some of the output, but we have no idea really what the big impact really was of that in the end. So I do think we need to pivot to that and say, how do we make sure that the workforce, that we're bringing everyone into the workforce, and frankly, 1 million young people, you know, and I know, having employed loads of young people, if you get them right, i.e. if you get them into a job that they like, and I mean, they're unbelievably productive, you know, I mean, they're just, so if we could even bring, you know, those young people in, let's just take it from a pure business perspective, it'd be a great thing to do. But from a human perspective, the idea you've got a load of young people who just don't have hope and they somehow feel that they can't get into this system, I mean, that's shocking. You know, there's a, you know, famous saying which has sort of been adapted over the years, but you know, that all that people really want is, you know, something to do, somewhere to live, someone to love, and something to hope for. You know, and I think that's true. You just want to give people, you know, the opportunity to get a house, somewhere to live, you know, build houses, you know, something to do. And I think if you can get people giving something useful to do, it's powerful. So a lot of this stuff that's going on around, you know, shaping the apprenticeship system with a big focus in getting young people into work is really important. I don't think we should dismiss it as just, oh, there's some magic bullet and suddenly this million people are going to disappear, because we know it's complex. But I think we have to make sure, you know, it's a national emergencies that we should have, you know, young people not able to engage in the workforce. And so, you know, the fact that we've done a load of this kind of pivoting towards young people making apprenticeship free up to 25 for small businesses, taking away the 5% contribution, all that sort of stuff is really good. And I think we need to focus on that. You know, we can't ignore the workforce that's in the workforce, because they're the ones who are generating the wealth and prosperity today to give the jobs for the young people to go into, particularly in this world of AI and so on. So I think we have to, you know, do a bit of a yin and yang. But no, I can totally understand the fact that we need to pivot more towards young people, and particularly given the numbers have dropped off so much in things like apprentices over recent years, we've got to do something about that. So very important, totally committed to it. And I think what we need to do is make sure that the early part of this conversation, we talked about industrial strategy and growing sectors and making sure we get the right people. We need to do that, and we need to give young people paths into those sectors, because they're growth sectors where you get good jobs and high value and high pay and so on.
Yeah, and it's that pathway and signposting, really, isn't it? It's how do you then, and supporting employers as well, isn't it? It's just that it's like trying to crack the puzzle, really, isn't it? If you know,
it's a multi-dimensional Rubik's cube that we're playing with here. So, but you know, I agree. But you know, in some ways, you know, keep it simple, stupid. It's basically, okay, if we can just make it easier for employers, if we can make it easier for young people, if we can talk in language that doesn't put people off, if we can, you know, make things more visible, paint pictures, all this stuff that we know as a human being works, tell people a story, all these things are important. So, you know, the more we can do that, the better, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. Phil, I've loved chatting with you, so I could have chat forever with so much with you on this. And we're nearly out of time, but we're in that time of year. I've got like a metal Christmas tree with a Santa hat on it. So like, if there was a Christmas wish or a New Year's resolution, what would you want from the Skills Santa if you had a choice to give for you and for the sector?
Well, you know, it'd be great to have a Skills Santa, wouldn't it? You know, and I think, you know, I'd love to give everybody in the nation a bit of a view of, you know, how a kind of skills telescope, if you will, or a skills kaleidoscope we used to get as kids, didn't we? That allow them to look into the system and see it from their perspective. Because I do think perspective is everything, you know, whether you're a small business owner, an individual, a large business owner, a college, a university, you want to look into this system and go, actually, if I just turn this a little bit, it all works for me. I can see my path in there. You know, we need to give people that sort of easy vision in there. Maybe it's not quite, it was our day or my day, Gavin, your day, probably you're younger than me, being like a 3D glasses or whatever, or a virtual reality headset that just goes, oh my God, this stuff is really straightforward. Here I can go over there and I can go along that way, and that'll get me to a job that I can see over there. Somehow clearing that smoke for people would be a brilliant thing to do. And I think if we can give everybody a pair of, you know, an augmented reality or a virtual reality headset or a kaleidoscope of simplicity, then that would be amazing, you know.
Yeah, no, that what a great wish that would be. I mean, we've been talking about AI and about agents and, like, you know, that personalization as well as what and local and national. Maybe soon, you know, there could be a way that we could be, you know, adapting large language models to be able to then look at the data, to be able to look at career routes and pathways for people, and to be able to get there. You know, things are moving so fast that maybe that's the solution. Maybe we've saved the nation billions, or maybe someone somewhere's going to make it. I don't know, but it was.
Who knows? But you know, ultimately, it's kind of there already. You know, I mean, even the generic models are super powerful. You know, I was on holiday in Japan a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said to me, "Okay, you do a talk about it in the local village," and I went onto it, and I just went onto the agentic AI. I said, "Can you just you know, sketch me out a quick, I went to these places, can you sketch me out a quick presentation? It's just like, this is astonishing. Things comes back with all the history and the travel and all about the bullet trains and all that. So I'm about to put all that in, but frankly, I don't have to do all that in. I'll stick a few of my own pictures in and pretend I wrote all. It's incredible.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today, and thank you so much for taking time out to talk through everything really around white papers, local, national, skills priority areas, NEETs, AI. It's been brilliant, and I'd love to do it again. And Phil, thank you so much for taking time.
Really good fun, and you know, yeah, we should talk about other areas because, you know, there are areas we could dive into a bit more. Just think about solutions, think about things that could work, because I love the reach you guys have got to talk to people, which is powerful. You know, so.
No, I really appreciate it. I think, yeah, I mean, we haven't even delved into clean energy. I mean, like that need for like 400,000 people in 4 years is like huge. Do you know what I mean? And like, but yeah, I'd love that. But I just want to say thank you. I know all the audience is going to love it as well. Thank you for taking time out today. And everyone who's listening, I hope you really enjoyed today. And thank you, Phil, for taking time out.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks.